Dwight C. Maxwell is an author, published poet, speaker, and lecturer of English in the UK's further education system. He has been in English education for over 25 years, beginning in the USA and moving to the UK in 2005. Dwight put forward innovative and anti-colonial models of education. He is interested in culture as a tool for social change and a pathway to self-awareness and knowledge of self. He says culture is not ornamental. It is informational infrastructure. Adinkra symbols, long used by the Akan people to encode philosophy and moral knowledge, mirror what modern physics now recognizes as error-correcting systems, structures designed to preserve meaning under pressure. When culture is removed from education, learning becomes fragile. When culture is restored, learning becomes resilient, adaptive, and self-correcting. This is one of the central arguments in the book. It's not just about grades, it's about culture, and why culturally grounded pedagogy is not optional, but essential. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, we have a dual purpose here. We have Valentine's Day as well as we have Black History Month. So this is going to serve in terms of Black History Month. This topic goes right along with that theme as well. So welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Dwight C. Maxwell. Dwight, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. How are you this morning?
All is well. And I always tell my guests it gets even better whenever that phone rings and I know we're connected and everything is working. So it's even better now that we're connected and on the air.
We're all in alignment.
That we are. So your book is, it's not just about grades. It's about culture. Now, Dwight and I talked the other night for almost an hour, and I was telling him what caught my attention was the title. It's not just about grades. So I tell you what, I don't have a set question sheet, but I do start pretty much in the same place in terms of with the same question, in terms of where did it all begin? Now, I know after reading the book, and I haven't completed it, but the parts that I have read, I know where you were born and started from. But my question is, you can share that, as well as when you were a child, was it your intent to one day be an author? Did you read a lot, or was that something you did? You write? Was it something you did in high school, something you did in college? Where did this whole, because you're now a published author, where did this whole thing come from? Where did it begin?
That's a great question. As a child, I had an interest in writing when I became in my early teens or pre-teens, actually. And it all began with the Bible. Funny enough. A lot of us grew up in the church, and when you're growing up in the church, one of the first book, of course, you're introduced to, the first book is the Bible.
That's right.
Yeah, indeed. And so I read it quite voraciously, voraciously, and it was basically one of the first storybook, if you want to put it that way, that I read and recalled. I was reading early. I mean, I had growing up learning difficulties. I wasn't a fluent learner. I had challenges in primary school and so on. I was very good at art. I would do a lot of drawing. My mom, who's a pillar in my life in terms of education, she always stressed the importance of education and learning. She would just bring home papers from the office where she worked, and blank sheets of paper, and I would just draw as a child. So that I started off drawing, and in some ways, drawing is definitely a form of communication that is about, imagination and visualizing, and writing has the same sort of mechanism behind it. So at an early age, I lived without my parents when I was young. I lived with my adopted grandmother in Washington Gardens in Kingston. I used to live with my uncle in the country, and I mean, we hardly, we attended schools, but not frequently, due to, the educational system at the time in those regions. of Jamaica was far and few between, in the sense that there were not that many schools. So we would travel long distances on foot, sometimes barefooted, to get to school. And, you'd have a classroom of, 30, 40 kids with one teacher. And I just remember, vying for the attention of that teacher. Also in Kingston, in my early years growing up, I struggled with reading and so on, and I was punished frequently and spanked by the teacher for not being able to read. I was in my book, I talk about the fact that my nutrition wasn't the best, and so on. Growing up with a single mom and, who struggled with 3 kids at the time. I started off writing limericks very early. I had a book of limericks, and this is me being a child where my father was in the United States and my mom was in the United States. I was in Jamaica and with family and friends and relatives and so on. And I would pretty much send myself to school. At some point, I would go to, when I went to school, I had no lunch. So I would just sit in the library because I had no money to buy food, in Jamaica, a lot of times, you paid for your books. Books weren't given for free by the government, so your writing utensils, exercise books, dictionary, Bible, whatever you needed, you would have to buy those. So I would go without anything, and because of the situation. And then I'd go to the library, and I would read mythology. And I was in love with mythology, so I started off reading a lot of mythology. As I said, the Bible was one of the books, and then the mythology, Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, Roman mythology, and that's what I'll be doing during my lunchtime while the kids are playing on the that was my thing. And then I had this book, a collection of limericks that I would, walk around, and it was hold it to my chest very close because I really enjoyed writing that, and that's where I began with poetry. It started with limericks, and so on. Yeah, so that was my early years.
It's interesting because you said you struggled as a child in terms of school, yet you became a teacher.
Indeed.
So now talk a little bit about is that why you became a teacher, or like how do we go from you're not the first person I've ever had say that I struggle as a child. However, as I became older or that made me more determined to get my education. Kind of talk a little bit about, what was it like now? You recognized that I was a struggling student, but ultimately you became a teacher.
Absolutely. I did. It was when I moved to the United States as a teenager, and I attended school in New York, Manhattan, 66th Street, Martin Luther King High School, junior high school. And it was sort of, I went through a remedial program. They actually put me in an ESL program to sort of help me to rebuild or to catch up to the rest of the students, and which was interesting because I'm coming from mainly English-speaking culture, and we're taught in English, so that was interesting. But they looked at my grades, and they just could see that I needed work. So I fell in love with my teachers because when I got to America, I've never had this much attention from teachers. In Jamaica, as I said, the class sizes were big, and when I look back, I wouldn't say that they had the skills or the differentiation skills, or were taught to differentiate. So everybody was taught around the same, at the same time, the same thing. So if you didn't know it, you would be left behind. And I think that's what happened to me. I remember one time when I lived in Manchester, with my uncle, who was, not educated. He was a farmer, but but he would send us to school occasionally, and other times we'd be working on the farm. And I remember in the classroom one time, I was writing something. It was an assignment was given, and I was responding to this assignment. And I just remember a long queue or line to the teacher. I was in that line when I got my turn. She looked at my book, and she tossed it across the classroom. I'm laughing about it now, but it was traumatic at the time. But it's good when you can laugh at things like that. She just tossed it across the classroom just to show how frustrated she was and how, probably disgusted by what I'd written. I mean, it probably couldn't make up my handwriting, and maybe my sentences didn't make sense. And I just remember, it was funny, going to the library and borrowing books, and I would read the books. I was just doing that stuff. It was in me, and then but when I came to the U.S. and I had all that attention, I flourished.
And now you see, that's interesting, because I always thought, like, in some respects, the concentration and like the discipline and everything in school in Jamaica was tougher than it was here.
Oh yeah, that is definitely, the discipline was tough, but the way the system over there was designed, if you were a fast learner, and if you would make it, and if you were a slow learner, you would fall by the wayside. So if you were a slow learner, you didn't have parents to pay for extra tuition and so on. You see, it's that kind of culture. So
okay, because that's right. Now,
they didn't have the facility. Yes.
While you're on that point, because we talked about this the other night. No, that's okay. This is what the listening audience and folks here in the United States need to understand. In the country of Jamaica, we're here, all our kids have to do is go to school. That's it. Just go. Just show up and do your work. In a country like Jamaica, or an island like Jamaica, the parents have to pay for everything. They pay for transportation. Right. They pay for clothes. They pay for books. They pay for lunch. Mm-hmm. There is no free lunch. There is no free you get books, or you come to school and the teacher gives you a notebook, or the school gives you pens and pencils. That does not happen in Jamaica. So when Dwight is talking about was, one, you're talking for the most part, just like here, where people don't have a whole lot of money, yet the expectation was you're going to have to pay for that. You have to come up with a way to pay for that. So to go to school there really was not only just a matter of the education, it was also about economics. So you had that as well. So when you came to the U.S., exactly what I just described, because in the U.S., unless you went to a private school, all you got to do is go to school. What was that like for you?
It was like I was amazed. Coming from a situation and circumstances where I didn't really get any one-to-one at all. Didn't get any one-to-one. No teacher identified my predicament and sat with me and said, okay, let's work this out, or differentiated materials for me. That was my experience. Jamaica went through, if you think about it, in the 70s, when Prime Minister Michael Medley came to power, he was one of the first prime minister to roll out a nationwide education system. Before that, Jamaica was quite elitist with education. Only the affluent went to school. Of course, there were schools for the common people, but as I said, it was mainly the wealthy that had access, or the middle class. Let's put it that, the middle classes, right? So Manley became prime minister in 1972, which was 1 year after my birth. So this is a section on page 65 in my book on how the U.S. Cold War destabilized Jamaica's education reforms in the 1970s and 80s. So Manley tried to create a system that was like Cuba. And Cuba has got 99% literacy.
Correct.
Right? Meaning that means 99% of the population of Cuba is literate. America has about something like 80-something%. It could be less. I don't have the figures in front of me.
That sounds about right. Matter of fact, one of the reasons this show came about 25 years ago was the station manager at that time was looking for somebody to do a show with the hopes that it would be a show about reading, and it would encourage people to read more. And so as I interview authors and you all showcase your work, the hope is folks will go out and get your book. And so, again, with the hopes that people will read more. So your stats are about right. So that is very interesting in terms of, because I'm always fascinated because, again, I'm very familiar with Jamaica because I shared the story with you the other night. I'm extremely familiar with Jamaica.
Yep.
And I know what we would talk about all the time. And a lot of the stuff you're saying is the same thing she would say. So to just pick up from one country and go to another, that, like you said, you went from having to pay for everything to now everything is handed to you. All you got to do is go.
Yeah.
Right, it's free. And like you said, you get the one-on-one. You're now, because I actually...
Yeah, ESL. I mean, I went, if you think about Martin Luther King School, the way it was structured, you had an ESL department. So they had designed in New York State, a system that would would facilitate students who were coming from other countries who didn't speak English fluently.
Correct.
The UK doesn't have that. So I was teaching in the UK. A country as advanced as the UK doesn't have a system like that. And that's where America should be dominating the UK in terms of literacy. But the UK is probably more literate than the US.
So you ultimately majored in English? Was that your major?
So as I said, my teachers inspired me. That's what I was going to get around to. My teachers inspired me. I was excellent at school. I don't know if you've ever heard of ARISTA, the National Honor Society.
Yes.
I was a member of that. I scored in the 90th percentile, It's like I was a new person. With a little bit of attention that I received, I excelled. And I majored in English in university, yes. When I went to Hobart and Westminster colleges in Geneva, New York, I majored in English and creative writing and literature and drama. That was my thing.
That is such a testimony and a testament to what a good teacher or teachers can do, because I cannot tell, and I'm in education, as you know, I cannot tell you the number of students that will say, if it wasn't for Mr. Such and Such or Miss Such and Such or this teacher or that teacher, I wouldn't be where I am today. I've heard the stories, again, like you say, you were struggling. And then a lot of times you'll come across those one or two people that, like you said, will encourage you and believe in you and put the time in you, and it changes your life.
That's right. And I had teachers I can still remember their names today.
That's right.
Some of them are not live anymore. Miss Farrell was one of them, who, I remember all of them, Mr. Poulet, Miss Cohen, Mr. Bertrand. We're talking about I was cocooned by those teachers. I mean, in the sense that they recognized my abilities. And I remember once they hired me to support students in an after-school program as a tutor. So they had students tutoring other students. They had set up a program where students would tutor other students after school. So I'd be working after school was done. I'd go down to the cafeteria and we'll set up the desks down there. There were the school lunch desks, the ones you can fold up and extend. And I would set those up, and I'd have my little group of students that I would be working with.
Well, they say the best way to learn something is to teach it. So you were actually teaching it at that point before you even became, a teacher. It's interesting, your path, because I'm working my way up to now your thought and your philosophy in the book. Because like I said, what caught my eye was this whole notion of it not being just about grades. I mean, I'm an educator as well, so I know and coming through school, it was always about getting the A, being on a roll, your report card. And then over the years, standardized testing really got used for accountability and this, that, and the other. So everybody went crazy in terms of the focus on this one score throughout the year. So when I saw your book, it's not just about the grades. I said, let me check this out, because that's something I am always saying, that school is so much more than just the grades, even though we know the academics are our business. But it is so much more. And then when you start breaking it down, like you're doing in your book, in terms of African-American children and people of color and so forth and so on, the importance of inclusion and the importance of understanding some things in the curriculum, what it is doing to children.
Yeah. Hmm.
So let's fast forward in terms of where did the concept for the book come from? Where did the concept for it's not just about grades, it's about culture come from?
Well, that came from my own experience, and as a teacher, when I began teaching, and I started to see how certain students were disenfranchised by the system, and I realized that they weren't. It wasn't just like me. If you look at my story, I wasn't getting the nurturing I needed, even though I was in my own culture. One of the things about the educational system in Jamaica at the time, it was very westernized, very British. So there wasn't really anything about who we were being taught. I wasn't learning about Marcus Garvey, for example, or I would learn a little bit about Nanny. And there was Miss Lou, and I remember she had a program on the television and on the radio. It was broadcasted on the television and radios on every Saturday, and it was called Ring Ding. Ring Ding, right? And all the kids would gather around, and Miss Lou will sing songs, and she'd tell them stories, about Africa and about various heroes in Jamaica who fought against slavery. And those, I remember those, and the Anansi stories, and that was, oral kind of tradition and learning through the oral tradition. And I think that's a very important part of learning. So in the early stages of children's development, it's good to begin by exposing them through, the oral tradition, which is how we teach children anyway, through, speaking to them, correcting their grammar, their sentences, but also telling them stories and teaching them to tell stories and, asking them questions about stories and so on. But when we look at when I was going to Martin Luther King, for example, I was excelling as a student coming from the Caribbean, but a lot of my African American students were dropping out. My fellow peers, African American students, were not doing as well. The Latinos were doing better. The Caribbean kids were taking advantage of the opportunities, and I think partially it was because of the culture at home. So we talk about the toughness of Caribbean parents. I mean, Caribbean parents are quite tough when it comes to education. Asian parents are quite tough when it comes to they take, they're very they expect that that you will as their child, that you will study hard, work hard, and achieve your highest potential. And that was done through a systematic structure within the home where you would, homework had to be done at a certain time. I mean, I didn't just achieve all that stuff with my teachers alone. My mom was very much, like a hawk when it comes to making sure I had my homework done, making sure that I would go to school every single day, didn't miss a day. Things like that. I couldn't stay in the house. You had to be out and go to school.
No, that's right.
And she checked those report cards fervently. And if I did well, I would go to the Gap, and she'd buy me a nice shirt, or something like that. And so that culture at home about education, and she always said, "Don't be like me. I had I only had a 6th grade education or something." So she always reminding us about the value of education and how it can transform our lives. So it's similar with, within the Asian communities. There's a book written by a woman called Amy Chow called Battle Hymn of a Tiger Mom, where she outlines, she's married to a Jewish guy. They're both Yale professors, and they talk about how they raised their daughters. They raised, they agreed, they made an agreement the girls were going to be brought up Jewish. But their Chinese culture was going to be the system through which they would be educated and supported and so on. So, and within that system, it was about, you can't bring anything home less than an A. It's the same thing among the Indians. When I was teaching in the United Kingdom, they were excelling above all other groups. And it's the same here. They excel above all other groups. And it's because the expectation is that you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer. These are the grades you need. aunts and uncles and everybody are part of that whole, system. Where you have to bring those grades home, and you can be shamed for not having the getting the grades. And if you're not achieving at the level where the whole culture or the community is anticipating that you should be at, to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, to be an engineer, an accountant, you would then be, you could bring shame on the family as a result. So that culture, of high expectations. James Flynn, in my book, I talk about James Flynn and how he wrote the book, Do Your Parents Make You Smarter? Right? And in that book, he looks at how vocabulary actually, the vocabulary of the parents actually impact on how well the child achieves and how far that child can go.
Absolutely.
And people wouldn't even think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you know what? It's interesting because I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet where that book is referenced, but I'm downloading that one today because, again, when I tell you when your book called and I started reading it, it's somewhat along the line of what I'm writing my dissertation on in terms of parental involvement and success or lack thereof on standardized tests, and that's what I'm taking a look at is because the whole concept, the whole notion came up when in my school, which is predominantly African American and Hispanic. If you ever look at the research for standardized testing, there's always the comparison between the Caucasian kids and the black kids, and they're always talking about the academic gap. They're always talking about the gap between black kids and white kids.
The attainment gap.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, but there's very little research within the race. In other words, you do have high-achieving African-American students, too. So what I wanted to see is
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to see. Okay, what's the difference between the high achieving African American kid and the low achieving African American kid, and does parental involvement have anything to do with it, particularly
absolutely.
On standardized tests? Right. So to your point about the vocabulary, because I'm focusing just on ELA, just on the English language arts part. So to that point, that's why I got to get that book. Exactly what you just said in terms of what words are used in the home. How do you speak? Are you doing baby talk? Are you using high-level words? Are you having high-level conversations? Because, that whole thing about people who curse a lot, they say people who swear and curse have very low vocabulary. That's why they curse so much, because they have very little vocabulary.
That's so true. And I mean, one of the things I completely agree with you. I know this because in the UK, as a teacher, I used to be in charge of literacy in some of the schools I worked at. I was a raising standard leader in one school for the entire school. We call it Key Stage 4 over there, which means Key Stage 4 will be the 10th and 11th grade, right? So I would be the one to come up with the design the curriculum, or to look at the curriculum cross-curricularly, looking at all the different departments and see what how are we implementing, for example, retention in terms of vocabulary. How are we doing? So we would have school-wide vocabulary quizzes and reward students who did well on these, right? If you look at spelling bee in America now, it's being dominated by Asians, but we do have occasionally Black Americans winning those, right? Or Black Caribbeans. So what we see with vocabulary is very important because, as you said earlier, and what I always tell my students, if you notice with a word, look at a word, you can break it down etymologically, right? You can break it down etymologically. Words are made up of other words. And then when you go deeper with it, when you start looking at definitions, then all of a sudden you open a whole can of worms right there. A definition may also include new vocabulary, right? So what we see when it comes to communication, the more words you master, what people look at, how you can tell if somebody's really intelligent is how many words they know, or how many words is contained within their vocabulary, within their lexicon, right? If the lexicon is limited, that person, logically based on studies, will be not less intelligent, but they're functioning at a different level compared to someone who has a large lexicon, because a large lexicon then opens your mind up to a broader world, a more nuanced world, a more diverse world, a more scientific. You're just more exposed as a result. So one of the things that was unfair about the SATs when I was growing up was that the vocabulary tests black students wouldn't do as well. And the reason why we didn't do as well is because many of us didn't learn Latin. So a lot of the rich white kids were learning Latin, which opened up the vocabulary to them, because they were learning about the root, the etymology, the origins, and so on of the words.
Right.
So they could break down any word they saw in English through its Latin roots, if it had Latin roots. So sometimes words have Germanic roots as well.
Right.
And there's a lot of borrowed lexis in the English language as well, from Arabia and so on. So, like the word algebra and so on.
Right.
So these things, that's a high-level concept. So if your parents are not, my mom didn't have a huge lexis, a lexicon to in terms of, because of her level of education, but because I was reading independently, right? So I would go to the bookstore. When I was in high school, I was reading science fiction books like Gene Roddenberry, Robert Heinlein, lots of fantasy books. I was reading quite profusely, and then I started to research as I got older, in grade 11 and grade 12. And so I was reading more complicated books and learning more extensive vocabulary. And at one point, when I was young, even in Jamaica, when I was like schooling myself, I used to go into dictionary and write down words. And then I'd go to my friends and use it and ask them, and then see if they knew what it meant.
Right.
So that was it. That was the kind of thing. But when we talk about culture, and I know you're going to get to this, but I was
that's where we're going. Keep going. Good. Keep going.
Yeah. When we talk about culture, and culture is another level, because one of the reasons why I think that I was able to do these things, and I'm going to say I know this was the thing, is because of the fact that even though I didn't have good schooling, I had good cultural upbringing. You see what I'm saying? A good cultural upbringing.
Correct.
So as I said, we talked about Miss Lou and Ring Ding and all the stuff she used to give me about Africa. And then I would meet elders who would talk to me about, the history of Jamaica, the culture, and maybe Africa and so on. And then instilling a self-confidence in me. So when I got to the United States, my confidence level was very high. Even though I wasn't the best student in the early stages, and I grew and developed through their nurturing and so on, I had a strong sense of self. So I was more serious than my peers. A lot of them who were more concerned about looking good and looking cool, where I was more concerned. I was already attuned to this. So I remember I wrote a poem when I was I think it was 11th grade or 10th grade in New York, and it says, and this is a poem I wrote back then, and this was from learning about slavery, learning about, the injustice of it, and it goes something like, if the gods were here, would man even dare to cross the Nile or sail the seas? Would a white man dare to set his foot on the mighty Egyptian beaches? Wouldn't the rain gods of my ancestors lash out upon them in agony and shame? This was a poem I wrote then. You know what I mean? My people.
Right.
My strong people would not. This must account for the many beaches. Right? So this is coming from, look at what I was writing at that age. So you have to think it's about so when you start to teach a child about their culture, that requires a vocabulary. So that historical vocabulary, that the Anansi stories, not only that, what African American culture has got, it already has the fundamentals to make the kids great. So, but what is missing is the execution. So, if you don't have parents who are conscious, who can, because the African American vernacular, for example, is more rich and more variant and more nuanced than, say, the typical lexis of a white person. So, of a middle class, let's say a middle class or upper middle class white child can't use language like the way a black child can. A black child can use language in a way that will run circles around you. And this was proven through a sociologist, a sociolinguist, whose name slips me at the moment. I should know it because I teach linguistics. So who did research on African American vernacular and found out that it was so rich and complex that it should be seen as its own language.
Wow.
Right? Because of the many levels to it. So the language already has the material in it, but what's missing is the grounding in the culture, because you've got there's so much culture in African American, so much information. But then one of the things we've got to look at, too, is the trauma, which is never addressed.
That's correct.
Yeah, they're never addressed. We just came out of, Jamaica came out, Jamaica got its independence in the 60s.
Correct.
And so did, you could say, the end of segregation kind of, is the same sort of thing, like independence, because you're going, African Americans were going to Jim Crow segregation. And
correct.
That was terrible with the lynching and the ostracism, the apartheid system that was there, which was also designed to keep African Americans, poor and illiterate, and all the different systems that they were trying to put in place. And we know that was overcome because we had brothers and sisters who rose up, who educated themselves literally, like Frederick Douglass.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? To transform and change situation, and people like Booker T. Washington, and who started schools, for African Americans to help elevate them out of poverty and the mindset. And yeah, so this is important. So Booker T. Washington schools were fantastic. The black schools that were in the South before the end of segregation were amazing, because they were teaching culture, they were teaching racial pride and things like that, which is what Asians have. If you read the book, The Triple Threat, Triple Package, I keep calling it Triple Threat, not Triple Threat, Triple Package, by that same woman, Amy Chow, and her husband. That's the second book they wrote. They talk about the three most important factors that young people need to have in their arsenal in order to be a top performer academically, right? And this is well researched. These are two college university professors who are looking at their own children development, looking at their own, and looking at Amy Chow is coming from the Chinese, who are the highest attainers in this country.
Correct.
Right? And they're also the highest attainers in England. And if you look at China, they're the highest attainers in the world.
Correct.
As a country. Right? So what we have to look at is what they're doing, and then start implementing it within our household. That's what it's going to take. But if you're functioning from a culture where your child's growing up thinking that, some of the stuff that's being taught through hip hop culture, for example, as culture, it's not culture.
That's correct.
It's pop culture. It's not high culture, and I try to make the distinction in my book. High culture is about institution building. It's about cultivating. Culture come from the Latin word cultura, which means to cultivate, like how you would farm, like how you would make a farm and grow your crops. So you got to ensure that the earth is the right, soil is good, that the soil is nurtured properly, and so on, and it's not exhausted. That you're using the right fertilizers, that you're watering every day, that that you're checking for insect, whatever. You got to nurture that child. So if that child is not being nurtured in the culture from early, between the age of 0 and 7, then you're going to have issues. You're going to have a sort of fragmented culture, where they would get some things, but they're missing a lot of other stuff, and then that have impact on the way they function in school. Because if I'm going to school and I have low self-esteem, I have no identity, or my identity is that I'm a gangster, or that, I'm looking at, I heard my mom and dad use bitch and dog, and that's how they relate to each other, and it's so low because that language, you got to look at the energy, how words have energies as well, and energetically, what you're doing. So that's also very important to keep in mind.
Listening audience, I hope you've been with me since 6, but I certainly hope you've been with me since 7, because my guest this morning is Dwight C. Maxwell. We're talking about his book. It's not just about grades, it's about culture. Now, I'm looking in your table of contents, and I know you start the book off with the Adinkra symbol key, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But chapter 1 was Introduction, the Racially Biased Curriculum. That's what you were kind of touching on a couple of minutes ago. Chapter 2, Between Culture and Biology, Culture Wars, and Why Schools Can No Longer Ignore Race in the Curriculum. Culture and Power. And then in chapter 3, you get into your childhood in Jamaica. And like I said, I know those areas you describe, I know exactly where they are. How the U.S. Cold War destabilized Jamaica's education reforms in the 70s and 80s. Jamaica became free the same year I was born. So I always know Jamaica's independence numbers because I was born in 1962. So I know every time I have a birthday, Jamaica had a birthday in terms of their freedom. My American Odyssey.
Look at that. You can't take that lightly.
No, you can't. And I told you, me and Marcus Garvey had the same August 17th.
You got to look at the energy. Yeah, the energy that was, we could talk about metaphysics and look at the energy that was actually abundant at that time. You know what I mean?
That's right.
You were born in that.
I was born in that year, and like I said, me and Marcus Garvey share the same date, August 17th.
What?
Yes, indeed. So we have chapter 4, Adinkra Symbols, the Key to Unlocking Your Child's Potential. Chapter 5, A Definition of Culture and Britishness. The Adinkra symbol of Negrabia, Purposeful Power, Divine Plan. You have lesson plans in there. Chapter 6, Black British Culture, School Inequality, and the Link to Underachievement. The symbol of Sankofa, well, that's the bird looking back to move forward. The symbol of Sankofa, Chapter 7, Examining the Role of Cultural Identity in Student Motivation and Achievement. Intersectionality, Culture, and the Impact of the Factory Model of Education, Chapter 8. The Role of Parents, Chapter 9, The Impact of Culture on Health and Well-Being, Keys to the Successful Student. The book goes on, has, how many chapters is it? 15 in all? 16 chapters in all.
Yeah, so 300 pages. I don't know how I did it.
I highly recommend the book. If you are a parent and you have a child, or if you are a student, I highly recommend the book, because the arguments that are being made in here, I, for a fact, have experienced and experience. Because you said something earlier about a child with low self-esteem, and how when you're constantly being exposed in a curriculum, for the most part, that makes you look like nothing, or either you had no contribution to anything in the world. At some point that begins, and then when you combine that, like you were saying, with the trauma. So when you have all these things in play, then you begin to question, well, you begin to, you're saying these children can't produce, but when you have all that you're up against.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that we have. I used to run a tuition company, in a small one in the UK. And I used to have clients from all walks of life. So I had Asians, like East Asians, South Asians, Black, Africans from Somalia, and so on, high achieving students, and parents who were spending a lot of money to make sure that their students got into grammar schools and into the best universities possible. Now, one of the things I've noticed with a lot of these kids, Somalians, for example, they come in, they're already culturally rich. Somalians are very proud of their Somalian background. Part of it is colonized because they're Arabized. But they hold to that Islamic culture, right? And that Islamic culture is quite clear about identity and so on. They identify, maybe with Prophet Muhammad, they identify as, whatever, energies are being perpetuated through that Torah, Quran, and so on. Pardon me. So they have a very strong culture. So they come in already seeing themselves as high attainers. And even in the school system, when I taught them within the public school systems at the college level and high school level, they were also high attainers. The Somalians are high attainers. I also found that my Chinese students, for example, when they came to see me on a Saturday or during the week, depending on when it was, they also attended a Chinese cultural school where they were learning Mandarin and Cantonese and all this stuff, and they were learning their history.
Now, see, so you're making the connection between knowing who you are, knowing your culture, in terms of your academic success. Now, see, I agree with you because, like I said, the school that I am currently leading, pretty much, as you know, that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, that's why, again, it's more than just about grades. It's the whole culture, it's life. It's, society's game, is life skills, critical thinking. They're getting all of that beyond 2 + 2 = 4. And I agree with you in terms of, like, you were talking about the curriculum stuff. Like, we could be here for hours. I could see that based on the conversation and how it's going. But talk to me a little bit about, like, what you were talking about with the curriculum. And as well, I wanted to help me connect the Adinkra symbol key. Help me connect the Adinkra symbol. And it's funny, as you're talking about Anansi, my favorite Anansi book is Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters.
Okay.
That's it's a kid's book, but it's an Anansi book. But one of my favorite books is
check that one out.
Yeah, Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters.
Is that the one where? Okay, we'll talk about that another time. But I'm very keen about Anansi. I don't know if you've ever seen American Gods and see the character Nancy in there, which is really good. But the book written by Neil Gaiman. Repeat the first part of your question again.
The connection, like, because we've been talking about in terms of, in your mind, your argument in terms of knowing your culture and being successful. But apart in terms of the African Americans, you have the Adinkra symbol key. How important is that? Because see, again, it's rare I go a day without having the Ginyami or either the Ankh on me somewhere.
Right. There you go. And you talk about the trauma and the miseducation of the black child, and you got to look at what's his name, who wrote Blueprint for Black Power, Amos Wilson. He's an amazing guy. That book he wrote, Blueprint for Black Power, is absolutely amazing. And he has also books, because he's a psychologist, and he has books about how black children learn and so on. And we have Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro. So one of the things we've got to realize is if we see today, there's a culture war going on. All right? There's a culture war ensuing. We have white supremacist ideology. There's a backlash from that group towards every other group.
Correct.
Right? And it's about them asserting, or their supremacy. And that's how they look at things, right? Supremacy, superiority, and so on. And there's also this sort of push to reclaim white culture and whatever that is, and so on. So they know the importance of culture, right? And the reason why they're pushing for that is because they've seen the infiltration of other cultures or incursion into, or those other cultures are becoming equal or rising up to have similar sort of status as their culture, right?
Correct.
And not only that, the other cultures seem to bring more to the table.
Correct.
In fact, most of European culture is coming from stolen from everywhere else, right?
Correct.
So that's just the history of that group of people. I'm not like criticizing, just saying historically speaking. But when we look at the black child in the classroom, and as you said, you pointed this out already, is about them sitting down in that classroom, and everything that's coming out is about Europe. And if you read anything about black people, it's about enslavement and their history in America. It's quite limited. So there's nothing about, and then there's a lot of misinformation about black culture. So you see like ancient Egyptians portrayed as white or Arabs, and it's nothing like that. There were Arabs, Egyptians, but they came later.
Correct.
They came, after many thousands of years. I mean, Egypt had 3,000 years of peace and 3,000 years to build culture, which no other society in the history of humanity has ever had. So and we're talking about a black civilization, and it's very obvious, and you just have to look at the paintings on the wall and so on, and you will see, and the sculptures and so on, and you will see who they really are, and their writings that they claim they already identify themselves. But we have the people who are controlling the culture. So it's very important. You have these gatekeepers in Egypt who control that, and they try to disseminate certain information. You got Hollywood as gatekeepers as well, and the kind of information that they're disseminating. So we're looking at the impact of how not knowing, just learning about a little part of your culture, which is about enslavement. So it's very, that's why books like Steinbeck's of Mice and Men can be so off-putting and destabilizing for black children, because it keeps reiterating this whole point of the Negro as a slave, and he needs to turn to the white man for his freedom. So if you're taught this way, so your child will always see themselves as inferior.
Correct.
And, there's no two ends. There's no debate about that. Whereas, and then this is not only that, there's an attack upon black culture again. Right? This is systematic. It's been going on for centuries. But there's another round of attack where Donald Trump himself has removed over 500 books written by black authors from libraries that are connected to the government and so on, and the military and so on. So books in the military that the military used to have really diverse libraries. Now Pete Hegseth and all those people are removing books written specifically by black authors and so on. So you see an attack upon that culture, but and then we also see in Florida where they're bringing in the curriculum where they're talking about the benefits of slavery.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So your child's going to be sitting in a classroom where they're learning how slavery was good for them. Right? So how is that? I mean, child has enough knowledge and information to know that me kissing someone's boot and someone being able to whip my butt anytime, who's not my mom or dad, who is using me for free labor, and me seeing the benefits of that. I mean, that's creating a conundrum in the mind of that child.
Correct.
So when we look at other groups like Asians, they're learning about. They have a religion that's intact, whether you're a Hindu or you're a Sikh or whatever. You have a cultural history where you see yourself as always portrayed as amazing, as achieving great things, building great civilization,
correct,
and so on. And we're going back thousands of years. So whereas our culture and in the West begins and ends with slavery, Jim Crow, so it's just torture, trauma. So you have to understand how that impacts on that child. And that's not addressed in the school system. So they're not looking at the curriculum and go, okay, how do we uplift this particular group of students, which is a form of differentiation.
Correct.
And of course, they're not addressing that for the last 60 years, for example, since the civil rights era. Why is it that consistently black children have underperformed compared to other groups? So they look at the top performers, on the average SAT math score, difference between black is like 454 on average, Asian 632. So, and so on. There's a huge gap there, of like 200 points, right? Or 300 points,
Correct.
And if you look at, that's a lot of points. So, so all of these, these cultural, not portraying black culture in its full light and giving it its full credit has had a big impact. Now, if you look on the continent of Africa, it's a similar thing that's going on. In fact, when I went to, I don't know, someone told me this in Ghana, or I read it, I can't remember exactly, but IMF, borrowing money from the IMF also stipulated that you couldn't put any money in education, right? So you weren't allowed to put any of the money you borrowed into education or into healthcare or to build infrastructure. They decide how you spend that money. So they may just tell you can only use that money for coffee, or you can only use it to make tobacco,
wow,
or whatever. Or they'll tell you exactly how to use that money because once you borrow it, then the next thing is now you are under their control in terms of how you pay back that debt.
Correct.
And they send in, IMF will then send in these people whose job is it to make sure you pay the money back. And so you can't invest that money in the way you choose to invest it. You have to invest it in a way to pay them back. So it oftentimes take away from your educational system. You can't build infrastructure with it. You see what I mean? So you start to, it sort of focus on import, export. The same thing happened to Jamaica. at one point, where the IMF, used the debt to control their means of production and so on. So what we see in African schools, for example, there is the curriculum is still westernized. So in a lot of these African countries, they still know nothing about their past. But ask them anything about Europe.
Wow.
Right? They'll be able to tell you. So we're still seeing that even there, the continent, that's why you have mass migration. So if all I teach you about is Europe, and how Europe is great, right, and how America is great, I mean, once you get your degree, where are you going? You know what I mean?
Europe or America, that's right. That's right.
You're heading for America, you're heading for France, you're heading for Germany, you're heading for, you know what I mean? So this is why it's so important. It's important to for us, because the point I make is that you don't have to rely on the school to do it, because the Asians don't.
Correct.
Even though their history is portrayed positively in school. You got to do it at home, and that's what this book is written for. That's why the Adinkra symbols in there. So the Adinkra symbols are like the first stage in educating your child. You can bring that into them from very early, from when they're toddlers. You can start teaching them, showing them these symbols, because they learn through images at that age. And you can start giving them the affirmations attached to each of the Adinkra symbols in order to empower them. The thing about Adinkra symbols, they're error-correcting codes. And so they go deep. When you look at, they're attached to philosophy. They're attached to parables and proverbs, and there's pretty much a metaphorine in the way they're structured, and that's why they're called error-correcting codes. The scientists adapted them in the U.S. in physics. Last name slips me now, but he's in the book. I mentioned him in the book. So the Adinkra symbol is meant to, if parents use them correctly, and I'm actually got some cards coming out that's going to be attached to the book, where you can use these flashcards with the kids and use them in the classroom. And the meanings and so on is going to be on them. So when the child sees Jinyame, for example, they would, that tells them that, there's a, higher,
correct.
Power, out there that, that they can trust to, ensure that their lives goes well. Or they look at, Sankofa.
Right.
It's about looking to the past, learning from the past, not
correct.
looking to the past.
Learning from the past to grow for the future.
From that.
Yep.
Exactly. And if you notice, one of the biggest things with people of African descent, they're not learning from the past, and they say only a fool does the same thing over and over and expect different results.
Correct.
So you have to learn from your past and stop repeating those mistakes.
Correct.
So that when you imagine instilling that in a child and then giving them the structure and strategy about how to analyze the past in order to correct it in the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm reading from chapter 4 right now, because you're in that area. You say, what if education were not merely the transfer of facts, but the reclamation of being? These symbols, pulsating with ancestral intelligence, call us to reimagine pedagogy as an act of resurrection, awakening within our Black youth the dormant power of self-knowledge, the unshakable force of identity obscured by colonial intrigue. Let them not simply learn, but remember. Let them not simply grow, but rise, armed with the clarity of who they are and the audacity of what they must become. The Adinkra does not whisper, it thunders. It is forgotten African philosophy, and in its resonance, we can find the blueprint for an education that does not colonize the mind, but liberates the soul. That's from chapter 4.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, what I'm talking about here is a spiritual transformation. So Adinkra symbols are not just, people. I mean, when you go to West Africa, like Ghana, for example, Adinkra symbols are everywhere. They're on people's houses. They're on fabrics. They're wearing in jewelry. And the reason why we do that as Africans, it's a thing that we do as Africans. Other cultures do it too. But the reason why we do it is because we want to always be in that state.
That's correct.
Of remembrance.
That is
we want to
correct.
be in that state. Yeah, exactly. So when we look at that ring, when you look at your Jinyame ring, you remember, there's a greater power than you out there. And that's not just telling you the greater power, but that greater power is watching your every move.
Correct.
So you got to behave accordingly.
And see, that's why I tell you, it's rare that I don't have either the Ankh, the Jinyame, I have an Ethiopian cross. I have many of our symbols, and I keep them around me for exactly what you just said. Because the other thing is about the whole notion of energy. Just seeing them, and like the fact that I'm wearing the jewelry or the shirt or whatever, I feel the energy.
It's the thing is, when I have a Jinyame ring too, but I remember when I gave it to my son when he was a kid, like he was 3 years old. I was mowing the back lawn and I gave it to him the whole, and he just threw it away. After that, I couldn't find it. But so I love that it was silver, and I loved it. It was made of jeweler, was so amazing. But I want to read something for you from 87 that says, as ideograms, Adinkra symbols are ideograms. And when we're talking about ideographic language, we're looking at like the Chinese language, for example, the way that the Chinese alphabet, the way they write, or the Jewish alphabet.
Correct.
Yes. Have you noticed? And the Arab, the Muslim, in terms of the way they form their letters. Their letters are not just like, over here in English, just like these words. They're symbols too. But they have multiple meanings. So if you look at the letter R, how many meanings does it have?
What do you mean? Alphabet R?
Alphabet R, yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
It doesn't have any meaning.
It's one. It's
just a word. It's a sound.
Right.
Right. It gives you a sound. That's all it does. Right? But if you go to Hebrew and look at Aleph, or one of those letters, it's not just Aleph, it's the name of an angel. Right?
Wow.
So, so that letter has multiple meaning and dimensions. Right? It even goes into mathematics.
Correct.
It's the same thing with Adinkra symbols. They're a language. Right? They're an alphabet. There's actually an Adinkra alphabet. So this is something that this is our stuff. This is what we created.
Correct.
That's what comes from our mind. This is how we think. Remember, we're in a Western paradigm, and our brains have been trained to think in this Western paradigm, which is not really our own worldview. I remember one of the things I talked about in the book is how when language is the language of a people, is their world.
Correct.
And when you take away the language, you take away identity, you take away their world, you take away their cosmology. So the way they see the cosmos, the way they see God, the way they relate to each other is removed. Because language contains all of that.
Correct.
In fact, language, with the invention of language is one of the last part of our brain development. It's not the frontal lobe is the last portion of the development of the brain, but you have the Broca's aphasic area, or the neocortex, which is responsible for speech, but not only speech, but imagination, creativity. So language and creativity are simultaneous. They're almost the same thing.
Well, again, I'm going back to the book of what you're saying here. In that same area, when you're talking about, I just was looking at it in terms of them being proverbs, and here it is here. Each Adinkra symbol represents a specific concept, proverb, or idea. They serve as visual representations of cultural values, wisdoms, and beliefs within the Akan community. Adinkra symbols are typically rich in symbolism, love it, and are used to convey messages, love it, and communicate complex ideas, love it. The symbols are visually distinctive and often consist of geometric shapes and stylized representation of everyday objects, animals, and plants. For example, the Jinyame symbol represents the omnipotence and supremacy of an incomprehensible power, force, or presence usually attributed to deity or God, whilst the Sankofa symbolizes the importance of learning from the past. That's what we were talking about. But see, again, how do we, because all right, I know about it because I read and I study and I'm into my ancestors and this and that. But and books like yours, that's why again I love it, because that's how the word begins to get out. That's how the messages begin to get out to educators and to parents and to children. Like anybody listening today, if you never heard of an Adinkra symbol, now it's something you need to look up.
Absolutely, and you need to start with my book on that, because it's it really goes into depth about what these symbols are. A lot of times people touch on the Adinkra symbols, but they don't go in depth like I do. And I bring it in and attach it to learning, which is something that is missing from that component, is how you bring the Adinkra symbols into the classroom to educate young people with it so it becomes empowering. Because that's what learning is supposed to be about.
Correct.
It's supposed to empower the young person to evolve and to develop and to become their best self, right? So it's about cultivating them, right? So this whole idea, Adinkra symbols are often used as, as I said, in so many ways in the culture. So you don't just teach a child to recognize the symbols, but they wear it.
Right.
And the reason, they're connected to hieroglyphs. It's the same kind of thing. And the ancient Egyptians are so amazing, right? Like no other culture exists like them. Maybe, where they had three different types of writing. They had the hieratic, the demotic, and the hieroglyph, right? So the hieroglyph was spiritual writings, okay? Writing used by the priest class. Then you had the hieratic, which was used by in mathematics or so on, or by the accountant and so on, and the demotic script, which is used for different types of writing, or maybe for more legal writing and so on. But so when you look at those different, the fact that those people were able to think on three levels, or realize that writing needed to change for different situations. Is also quite remarkable. So we have to remember that we're coming from a culture where a very, very high culture.
Correct.
We're not talking about booty and tits and liquor and money, but we're talking about building people. We're supposed to be building each other up, building up our children so that they can ascend to a higher level of consciousness. And become divine beings.
That's correct.
Right?
And on that note, absolutely, because on that note, that's another area that I love. I told you when we talked the other night, there are like pages, because in the iPad, it allows you to highlight. When I tell you I have pages of yellow, but this is another spot I highlighted. And you just touched on it about things. It says consumerism and materialism are also facets of Western culture and are contrary to traditional cultures, would often emphasize spiritual and communal values over material possessions. In Western societies, consumerism and materialism have become more prominent, impacting lifestyles, priorities, and even influencing cultural practices. The pursuit of economic success and consumption has altered perceptions of cultural values and priorities. You go on to say in this book, when culture is mentioned, it refers to the traditional values that have evolved over thousands of years, which has been handed down by your ancestors to assist in your social, psychological, and spiritual growth and development. A culture is a type of power system, quote unquote, and you cite Amos Wilson, 2000, that includes all of its members and the various groups and institutions which constitute it. Like you were just saying in terms of it, and we're coming down to the close. I tell you, it goes quick. But the culture that you're talking about is about building, not about tearing down.
Right. Yes. It's about building. It's about repairing. But it's also, if you listen to what Amos Wilson says, it's about creating institutions. I mean, there's so many levels. When we talk about words earlier in etymology.
Correct.
I could just drop one word on you right now and just tell you to go research it, and it will blow your mind. And the word is egregore.
Wow. Spell it.
Right? Egregore. Look up that word.
Is that
Look at the meaning of
EGRE?
that word.
EGREGOR?
EGRE. Yeah, EGREGOR.
Right. Just like it sounds.
You know what I mean? But another thing is, too, you got to look at what's happened to the black community. A lot of our people are not interested in knowledge. They're not interested in reading. They're not interested in becoming, they're more interested in, cool, looking cool, being cool, being, seen, but not building that, to get to the level of our ancestors.
Yes.
To meet the bars that our ancestors set, it requires discipline and hard work and investigation and commitment, and it's another level. It's become if you look at what the Chinese are doing today, their culture there and so on, they're a good example. I have to say, compared to any other group.
Well, I'll tell you what.
To me,
two more things. I got to have you back. We got to continue this guy. I got to have you back on another time.
I would love to.
However, two things, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to promote, and then we're going to be out. What you just said about not wanting to read, I tell my students more often than not, during slavery times, we had folks, if you were a slave and you learned how to read, you could be killed. If you were a slave owner or a white person who was teaching a black person how to read, they could be killed. And what I tell the students now is these people could be killed for learning how to read. And here we have to almost kill you to read.
Absolutely.
So it's like, it is a struggle, and I get the technology thing, and
it is a conundrum.
It really is. And so back to what you were talking about with back to what you were talking about with the ancestors, their strength. Just past Sunday, my pastor's sermon title was "They Ain't Like Us." And he did a really nice play on words, because on the beginning you would think he was talking about something else. Because, one of the rappers, I forget it, he did the Super Bowl thing last year. That was his song, They Not Like Us.
Oh, yeah. Remember that? Yeah.
So,
Kendrick Lamar.
Yes, Kendrick Lamar. So when I first heard the title, I thought that's where he was going. But that's not where he was going. He went to what you just said. When he said they not like us, he was talking about our ancestors and how we don't have the strength and the tenacity and everything that our ancestors had. So that's what, in his sermon time, when he said they not like us, that's what he was talking about. Exactly what you just said, that we're not now willing to do what needs to be done to build. And that's exactly what he was talking about. That they not like us. They were putting together black colleges. They were putting together black banks and black businesses and this, that, and the other. They did more with less.
They built civilization. Another thing you got to learn about the ancestors is that they not only built civilization, but they went around the world and built civilization. Their civilization was so structured, and so they could package it and send it somewhere. And that's what's incredible about it. But also, when you look at culture, culture is also one of the things I mentioned in the book is that culture is genetic.
Right.
And when you look at, for example, Chinese people, like whenever they go anywhere in the world, they build a Chinatown.
Correct.
And you can walk into Chinatown anywhere, and you'll know it's a Chinatown. Correct. Right? There's the architecture.
That is correct.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
that is correct.
You look at Indians that go anywhere, they make sure they move everybody else out. They buy up the property, then they build their thing.
Correct.
Either they're going to build a mosque, or they're going to build a Gujarat, or whatever they're building. Buddhists, the same thing. So they're carrying that culture from thousands of years ago.
Correct.
And they are. So when you look at us and you look at our community, what we have to realize is that we have been remade in the image of our masters.
Correct.
And therefore we are replicating what they do. Correct. But on a lower level.
Correct.
Because we're not building the institutions that they are building.
Correct.
We're not building. Yeah, we ain't building. You've got a school, and I've got to give you, my hats off to you. That is a beautiful and high level endeavor, and an achievement, because and you have brought in the culture into it, the high level culture. to take these children to the highest possible level in terms of their understanding of self.
Correct.
And and when you look at, we have Kendrick Lamar, but even him, when I listen to his rap, I love his stuff. But it goes back to the N.
Right.
And
right.
I don't even want to say that.
Right.
Word.
No, we can't. We don't even say it on the air.
Community.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So
exactly. That's not. I talk about that in the book as well. I've got a chapter on that, and it's about the fact that you're using words that disempower you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that's part of it too.
Yes. I'm in your amen corner on that, because that's we get this silly argument. Because like I said, we could talk for hours. We get this silly argument. Oh, it's not what you're called. Is what it's not by. I forget how they say that thing. It's not. It's what you answer to. It's not what you called. It's what you answer. And I've heard folks tell me, oh well, we turn in what was used against us, and now we make it something that's for us. No,
doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely not. So
it's the same thing. So why did you go from that to start calling your women bitches?
Yes. I mean, it's the same type.
You men dogs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. You are using what it shows from a psychological level is that you're now using words that normally we call in English in linguistics. There's something called amelioration and pejoration.
Right.
And it's about how words change over time, change their meanings over time. So when a word used to be negative now becomes positive, that's amelioration, and pejoration is when it's the other way around. I hope I'm using those correctly. But the thing is, when you look at the word, the N word,
right.
Okay, it is so if you look at it, it's a nuanced word. So
correct.
Some people might use it positively.
Mm-hmm.
Other people use it negatively.
Mm-hmm.
If a white person says it, you attack them.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you mean? So it's like there's so much controversy around it.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to surround yourself? I don't know if you mean, because, for example, if you and I have an altercation and I use it, it means that I'm going to do some damage, right? Or I'm getting there, right? And, to the point, I could see my friend and say, "What's up, my end?" And that might come out positively. So, but what we're trying to do, when you look at the study done by the Japanese scientist, where he writes words on water,
right.
like he put a glass of water, and then he looks at what happens to the molecules.
Correct.
And if you I want to see what happens when you put nigger on one of them, because it can't be positive.
Right.
Like words like love,
right,
kindness.
Right.
You see the molecules looks amazing, or in the water, they form amazing structures.
Correct.
And when you put hate and things like that, and remember, these are frequencies.
That's
so we have
correct.
to understand that. Because how would the water know?
That is correct.
You know what I mean?
That is correct.
Yeah, so there's something going on there.
That is correct. That's why, even my show last week, and the listening audience know that I am constantly talking this whole notion of words have power. And you're right. They have energies, they have frequencies, they have power. But I tell you what, like I said, I got to invite you back so we can continue this part too. But this is what's going to happen. For the next few minutes, I'm going to turn off the microphone and you get to promote the book, websites, book signings. The only thing you cannot say is a dollar amount. That folks can work that out once they get in touch with you. But telephone numbers, websites, book signings, the name of the book. Matter of fact, I'll give the name of the book. The book is It's Not Just Grades. It's not just about grades. It's about culture. Yeah. That's the name of the book. It's not just about grades. Right. It's about culture. So I'm going to shut off the mic. You can promote for a few minutes, and then we'll be out.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's been a pleasure. All right, guys, if you've been listening to our show, to Mark's show and the interview, the book is called It's Not Just About Grades, It's About Culture. And you can purchase this book from Amazon, Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk if you're in the UK. You can also purchase it from Barnes & Nobles, right? So you can find it on website and Waterstones if you're in the UK. And also on my website, culturetransforms.com. culturetransforms.com. You can go on there and you can register to stay in touch with me. Or once you click on purchase this book, it will give you a chance to put your details in, and then I will get those details. If you don't hear back from me, please email me at Safari Academy, okay? Or you can actually, better yet, email me at Dwight Maxwell at Outlook.com. Okay? So that's one of my emails. That's dwightmaxwell@outlook.com. I'm still working on setting up the infrastructure to receive your queries and your invitations if you have any for me. You can also reach me at 470-312-9556. So please don't hesitate to call me or send me a text if you want me to do a talk for you, or if you want to learn more about the curriculum that I'm putting together and so on. Or if you like to invite me somewhere, I'm free and ready to go. So you let me know, okay? And the number again is 470-312-9556, and the website is culturetransforms.com.
Man, I am energized and incentivized. Just, I felt that way when we talked the other night, and I feel that way yet again because the objective of this show is to entertain, educate, inspire. I mean, it's like multiple objectives, and this morning was definitely education as well as inspiration. All right,
and I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Same here. So I am going to have you back. Like I said, I do record the shows. I upload them, the vocal piece or the audio piece, up on my YouTube channel. And folks who didn't rise early with us this morning will have an opportunity to go back, and you'll have an opportunity to go back and listen to it as well. All right. So I will be in touch with you. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and rest of the week. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
All right.